on the News Channel 5 network. This is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Beres here. I hope you had a good weekend. It's Monday, and we're coming to you live and direct here at 8 o'clock this morning. You can join in the conversation. As you see, we're going to be talking, we'll get the number up there for you in a moment, about national politics with an international flavor, and it's in the aftermath of some of the things happening right now. As you know, of course, the chemical attack in Syria, the horrible attack, anytime chemical weapons, weapons of any kind, but chemical weapons, drew a response from the United States and a bombing, and the president, really in his first military action of this way, authorized it and bombed the air base and some areas around there where the chemical weapons originated from in Syria. All right, and so we have that happening and the aftermath of that and what happens next, as well now as activity in North Korea as they continue to have provocative actions, and we hear about them testing missiles that could maybe deliver a warhead to the United States and all this. Aircraft carriers, U.S. aircraft carrier actually right now is en route that direction to North Korea. Whenever you see one of these big giant moving islands of our aircraft carriers coming toward you, that's a big story, and so it's on its way as well. All of this happening, what does it mean? What do the allies think? And what is our president thinking at this point? How does this square about some of the things he was talking about, whether the U.S. should be policemen of the world or back away a bit, and maybe what prompted him to say, yeah, we have to respond to this chemical weapon? I want to hear what you think, 737-7587. And also, we're going to be joined by our expert this morning who will give his take on it, Professor Marc Schwerdt from over at Lipscomb University. Good to have you on, sir.
Nice seeing you.
A lot going on.
Yes.
And as I threw out, we were just talking before the show, the first, and I was kind of asking him that question just leading into it about Donald Trump during much of his campaigning was saying, look, it's time for America to kind of, pull back in and not have to be policemen for the world. And then this chemical attack happens, and some say, well, wow, he chose to respond, which I think a lot of people say chemical weapons may be a good idea, but that kind of contradicts his idea of not being the policeman for the world. But what was your take on maybe why he did that?
Well, I think my take would be, first of all, when you're trying to interpret what he did and what it means, a lot of what we're dealing with there is what we thought he meant during the campaign, that not being policeman of the world equals an isolationist kind of foreign policy. And he never really did that. He never said we would draw back and within our own borders. He was trying to make more of a America first, which has a lot of baggage to it as a historical term, but I think you can still look at this and say what he did was relatively minimal. And when you're looking at the use of chemical weapons in Syria, the relevant experiences there with President Obama several years ago when he talked about, okay, well, we've had a chemical attack there several years ago, here's our red line. And so then there was a process of, okay, we didn't do anything militarily then, but there was a process of, okay, now we have all those chemical weapons out of there. There was a process working with the Russians, working with the Syrians to get those out of there. Well, obviously, this means there were still some there. Either they held back or they still have the ability to make them. And I think President Trump is doing two things here. One, he's trying to reestablish the credibility of American foreign policy, that we're going to, even without really making grand statements, we're going to say there are certain things that are off limits. Okay, and that is something that can be done, and he did it minimally. Okay, this was a fairly minimal response. It was targeted. It was against a military target. It was with cruise missiles, which means you don't put Americans at risk, which goes along with his kind of thinking. I don't want American lives at risk. And it puts also the Russians on notice that there are limits to what they can do in terms of what they can get away with. Because one thing you could argue from this, and there's no real statement from Assad or anything about this, why would he do it now? It seems like he's doing it because, well, for one, he's a very horrible person. He's a dictator, and he's done these kind of things for years and years. And he probably feels like, well, Trump's in there, Russia's got my back, therefore I can get away with more things, and I'm ready to put this to an end.
So you think he was testing too?
I think at least he was sending a message to people in Syria. I don't think he was really concerned about the international community or the United States particularly, because he felt like we're not going to do that. We're focused on ISIS, which again, that's another thing we still have taken our eye off the ball on as far as the public goes. That's still going on over here. So I think when you're looking at this situation, I wouldn't see it as a complete 180 by the president. It's not like he's going to become some sort of interventionist all of a sudden on the scale of a 2003 Iraq invasion or something of that nature. I think this was a particular. I wouldn't say see us doing more unless something escalates the situation.
Yeah, and I think the polls have come out. The majority of Americans appear to have agreed with the move to do this. I think the vast majority of Americans do also say they don't want any troops being sent in.
That's the other side of that equation.
And you said, I think the president probably sees that. From Assad's point of view in Syria, then, do you think he was emboldened? I mean, he has other weapons, but I mean,
he does.
Did he not know? He had to know that there would be some type of even beyond a normal weapon reaction to chemical weapons. Was he like, I'm going to test it and use it, or is he that stupid?
Well, did he though? Because
so he figured just use this, no one's going to think anything big deal?
He got away with it several years ago.
Okay. Well, but he didn't use it since then, once that line was drawn.
But there have been opportunities to do something about him in response to something like that. He got away with it. He figures, well, I can do it again. And what he has to demonstrate at this point is he's still trying to stay in power. So the idea that he is going to do whatever the Russians tell him, you got to think about, he's not going to simply be a stooge of the Russians, even though he really needs them. He also can't simply be seen to say, well, I'm going to wait this out. Okay, he's got to be able to put his enemies, the Syrians there on the ground, and other Arabs and other ones like that, to say, listen, I'm not done here. I am going to solidify my position, and I'm going to push this as far as I can, because the situation in Syria is very fluid. Okay, right there in the middle of Syria, you have Islamic State. Yeah, and that's where forces are coming from the other direction, from the east. That's Kurds. That's U.S.-backed. That's Iraqi forces are probably going to stop at their own border, but they're going to be moving forward there, and they got to get rid of that central IS enclave headquarters in Raqqa. And once that's done away with, that means the board at the table is swept clean. Oh, okay, now we can focus on Assad. Yeah, and that's what he's playing a longer game than probably some are giving him credit for. You cannot look at this as simply, why did he do it at this moment in this situation? Was the situation so terrible? It's that, how does this fit into a larger situation? He's trying to make sure he's got as much territory in his own hands, and chemical weapons, as terrible as they are, and as ineffective in some ways as they are very good at creating terror and making populations move away.
They see that and they move
because
out,
it's indiscriminate.
I see, right.
And also, it gets down into the places where people would ordinarily hide to resist. Yeah. Basements, underground stuff, and things like that.
That's interesting. All right, now the
I'm not saying that's what happened. That's
I know, but that's how those weapons work, though.
If I see it coming towards me, I'm running the other direction.
Yeah, because it's going to permeate walls, whatever.
I can duck down when somebody's bombing me, or I can get down under something if somebody tries to shoot at me. I can't do that with chemical weapons. It's a terror weapon. Yes. On the battlefield.
Okay. And as far as the whole idea of ISIS and its enclave there and Assad, I mean, and you've seen some reports, and if Assad was to be removed,
yes,
some people think things could get worse there than they are already. Because then, I don't know, does Assad in some ways try to subdue ISIS?
Well, of course, ISIS has seen him as a target, because that's where they got their real sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Real shot in the arm. Okay. They kind of developed after being driven out of Iraq. Right. And they took advantage of the chaos in Syria. Okay. They're feeding off of their origins are within Al Qaeda. Okay. And so the chaos in Syria allowed them to spread out and do everything that they did starting in 2011, 2012. They took over the second or third largest city in Iraq. We're still fighting that battle in Mosul. They took over large swaths of what essentially is unoccupied territory in Syria because of all the chaos and fighting that's occurring over in the western part of Syria, which is where all the people are. Damascus, over next to where Lebanon and Syria, Israel and the Mediterranean are. Okay, so all of that is where most of that fighting is taking place. That's where Aleppo is, that's where Homs is, that's where Damascus is. So all of that territory that IS has is largely unoccupied and desert and things like that. They've got a couple of good-sized towns they've taken over. Part of it's been taken back over by either American-backed rebels or Turkish-backed rebels or by the Syrians themselves. And they're really closing the noose on IS. Everybody assumes IS is going to be destroyed fairly soon. Okay? We're talking in the next few months.
Okay.
It's going to be bloody. It's going to be destructive. But it's a foregone conclusion. Now, IS has been going to become something else, something more like Al-Qaeda, dispersed terrorists. But the fight for Raqqa means, okay, who's going to finish it? Because you've got basically conflicting interests and agendas there. The Turks want to prevent the Kurds from gaining a homeland. The U.S. and the Kurds, that's our most reliable ally and the most effective. Then you've got the Syrians who have their own ambitions. We want to get rid of Assad, create our own country, or restore our own country, all that kind of stuff. The Russians are trying to maintain their presence and keep Assad in power. So all of that's going to come down to if whoever takes over Raqqa, which I think will probably be us at the rate they're going, but it gives the Kurds a seat at the table of whatever settlement's going to come out of this. I don't think, and this is what people are saying is going to happen now that we've sent those cruise missiles into Syria, that regime change is on the table. It's on there as a threat from the United States, but I don't think it's on our, because that means we've got to fight the Russians or convince them to leave.
Right. You hear Rex Tillerson say regime change, is not. So, and he's hoping maybe the folks in Syria take steps or he gets removed. But I don't even think
they hope that.
Yeah.
I think they just want to, just don't do stupid things.
Yeah, just don't do that anymore.
Yeah,
exactly. That's the sense I get.
Is Assad crossed over that line, whatever line it may be, where he's intolerable?
Yeah. And if he hasn't, then maybe, as we go to the break, what's interesting too is you talk about the cruise missiles. I don't know, what was it, about 50 of them fired?
It was 59.
59. Cruise missiles, you think, pretty hardcore, and many of them hit the airstrip where supposedly the chemical weapons originate from.
Hit the hangars.
But I saw this morning, that's already open again. What do 50 cruise missiles do? I just had this image that, you send 50 cruise missiles in, the place is obliterated. It's already up and running again this morning.
It is, because that's territory, okay? Those are hardened targets. If it were a building, it'd be something.
I know.
But you're talking about blowing up a road.
I guess road,
and so all you got to do is fill in some dirt,
planes,
put in some asphalt,
whatever.
And you're good to go again.
I guess so, but that quickly.
They said they destroyed about 20 planes.
Okay, well, that's
good. And that's
a
sizable part of that entire Air Force.
Yeah, I would think so. I'm just wondering, what bang did you get for your buck?
It's a message
more than anything else. Because you're right.
It didn't cost any American lives.
And it was a measured response. In the scheme of things, it wasn't huge.
Yeah.
And that was it. All right, let's take a break on that note. We've got some calls coming in. If you're on hold, stay there. We'll talk more about that. Any questions you have for the professor. We'll also segue to some degree to the situation in North Korea and get his thoughts on that and yours as well. We'll be back with more right after this. Stay with us.